Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive.
Definitely.
Today,
Absolutely.
we are diving into some seriously murky waters.
Ooh.
The rhetoric coming from one presidential candidate just days before the election.
Yeah.
You ready to unpack this?
Let's get into it.
All right, so we've got an article from the Daily Beast titled, "Who Has Donald Trump Threatened with Death or Violence?" A short list.
Okay.
And let me tell you, the list is long,
Uh-huh.
and it is full of some pretty big names.
Yeah, the timing of this article is interesting.
Right.
Just days before the 2024 election, with tensions already running high.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just strong words we're talking about.
Yeah.
This article claims Trump's rhetoric has taken a dark turn with accusations of fascism and even threats of violence.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Sure.
The article highlights this quote from Trump where he says, "America's biggest enemy isn't some foreign power, it's the enemy from within." He even hints at potentially involving the military.
Wow.
What do you make of this?
Well, this enemy from within rhetoric has a long and troubling history.
Hmm.
It's a tactic used to create division and fear, often painting ways throughout history.
Yeah.
Think McCarthyism, the Red Scare,
Oh, wow.
even Nazi Germany.
It's chilling to think about those parallels, and the article doesn't shy away from drawing comparisons to fascism,
Right.
even bringing up a recent Trump rally at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
You know, the same place where American Nazis held a rally in support of Hitler back in 1939.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the article labels Trump a fascist,
Right.
a label he strongly denies. But it's important to understand why these comparisons are being made.
Yeah.
The use of enemy from within language, the reported admiration for figures like Hitler, and the overall tone of his rhetoric all raise concerns for those studying fascism and its historical patterns.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how all of these different things kind of come together and how they sort of paint a picture
Exactly.
of what's going on.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the individuals Trump has allegedly threatened, because that list is pretty shocking.
Okay.
We've got politicians like Liz Cheney, who Trump suggested should have 9 barrels shooting at her to see how she feels about gun control.
That kind of language is incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
It's not just about disagreeing with someone politically. It's about using violent imagery to silence and intimidate them.
Uh-huh.
The casualness with which he invokes gun violence against a political opponent is deeply concerning.
And then we have Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who Trump suggested should face the death penalty for a phone call he made to China.
Wow.
What's even crazier is that the phone call was reportedly approved by Trump's own administration.
Yeah, that's what makes this so unsettling.
Right.
It raises serious questions about his judgment, his temperament, and his understanding of the rule of law. Even those who served under him are not exempt from his attacks.
It's wild.
Yeah.
This next one is just plain bizarre.
Okay.
Trump shared a video depicting Biden as kidnapped. I mean, what message is he trying to send with something like that?
When you look at the bigger picture, it fits a pattern of dehumanizing his opponents. This kind of imagery isn't just about political disagreement, it's about painting the opposition as someone who deserves to be harmed.
It's like he's creating this alternate reality where anyone who opposes him is an enemy of the state, a criminal, even less than human.
Right.
And that's where things start to get really scary.
Yeah, it's a dangerous path to go down. And the article doesn't just focus on individual targets, it also highlights Trump's threatening language towards entire groups.
And that can have some serious real-world consequences.
Absolutely. When you start demonizing entire groups of people, you create a climate of fear and intolerance, which can easily escalate into violence.
We saw a chilling example of this during the George Floyd protests when Trump tweeted, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." He even reportedly asked if they could just shoot protesters in the legs.
That phrase, "when the looting starts, the shooting starts," has a long and disturbing history of being used to justify violence against Black people. It's incredibly irresponsible and dangerous for a political leader to use that kind of language.
And let's not forget his rhetoric on immigration. He's called undocumented immigrants animals and rapists. He's even said that deporting them would be a bloody story.
The language he uses to describe immigrants is dehumanizing and fear-mongering. It creates this image of immigrants as a threat, as invaders, rather than recognizing them as human beings with their own stories and struggles.
It's like he's intentionally trying to divide the country, to turn us against each other. And the scary thing is, it seems to be working. Look at how polarized our political landscape has become.
You're right, political polarization is a serious problem, and this kind of rhetoric only makes it worse. It creates echo chambers where people only hear information that confirms their existing biases, making them less willing to engage in civil discourse or find common ground.
And we can't ignore the role of social media in amplifying this kind of divisive rhetoric. It's like a breeding ground for hate speech and misinformation.
Social media algorithms are often designed to promote engagement, which means they often prioritize content that triggers strong emotional responses, whether it's anger, fear, or outrage. This can create a feedback loop where the most extreme and inflammatory content rises to the top, further polarizing the online landscape.
So we've got this candidate using increasingly violent rhetoric, targeting individuals and entire groups, and experts are genuinely concerned about what he might do if he wins this article. Even dives into what those potential consequences could look like, and it's not a pretty picture.
There are serious concerns that he might weaponize the justice system and the FBI, using them to target his political opponents and silence dissent. We've already seen him try to pressure the Justice Department to investigate his rivals, and there's a real fear that he could use these institutions for political revenge if given a second term.
And it's not just the Justice Department. Former military officials are worried he might try to use the armed forces for his own agenda, like cracking down on protests or intimidating his opponents. I mean, that's straight out of an authoritarian playbook.
The military is supposed to be apolitical and subservient to civilian control. The idea of a president using the military against American citizens is deeply troubling and goes against the very principles of our democracy.
It's like we're teetering on the edge of a cliff, and a wrong step could send us tumbling into chaos and authoritarianism. It's pretty overwhelming to think about.
It's understandable to feel overwhelmed, but it's important to remember that we're not powerless, the future isn't predetermined, and there are things we can do to protect our democracy and prevent this worst-case scenario from becoming a reality.
So what can we do? I mean, it feels like we're up against a tidal wave of hate and division. How can we possibly make a difference?
The first step is awareness. We need to understand the stakes of this election. The very real threats to our democracy that a Trump victory would pose knowledge is power. And by educating ourselves and others, we can start to push back against this tide of misinformation and fear-mongering.
Right. But awareness alone isn't enough. What can we do to actually make a difference, to counter the forces of hate and division that seem to be gaining ground?
We can make our voices heard. We can vote. We can volunteer for campaigns. We can donate to organizations that are fighting to protect our democracy. We can have difficult conversations with our friends and family, challenging their assumptions and encouraging them to think critically about the information they're consuming. We can engage in constructive dialogue, promoting understanding and empathy, even when it's hard.
I guess every little bit helps, right? It still feels daunting, but I appreciate the reminder that we're not alone in this fight. There are people out there who are working tirelessly to protect our democracy, and we can all play a part in that effort.
Exactly. We can't afford to give in to despair or apathy. We have to believe that we can make a difference, that we can build a better, more just, and more equitable society. But it requires active participation, courageous conversations, and a commitment to defending the values that underpin our democracy.
It's a stark choice we're facing. Do we want to live in a country where fear and division reign supreme, where the rule of law is eroded, and where the rights of minorities are trampled upon? Or do we want to live in a country that embraces diversity, upholds justice, and ensures that all citizens have a voice?
And that's the question we all need to be asking ourselves as we head into this election. It's not just about choosing a candidate. It's about choosing the kind of future we want to create for ourselves and for generations to come.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at a crossroads.
It does.
So let's recap what we've learned from this deep dive into Trump's rhetoric.
Okay.
We started with this article from the Daily Beast, which laid out a pretty alarming pattern of violent language and threats directed at individuals and entire groups.
We explored the historical context of his enemy from within rhetoric, drawing parallels to past examples of how this kind of language has been used to justify persecution and violence. We also discussed the specific individuals and groups he's targeted and the potential consequences of his words, especially if he were to return to power.
We also delved into the experts' concerns about the potential weaponization of the justice system and the military,
Right.
and how those institutions could be used to silence dissent and consolidate power. And we talked about the broader societal trends of polarization and the role of social media in amplifying extremist views.
It's a complex and multifaceted issue, but I think this deep dive has given us a better understanding of the dangers of this kind of rhetoric and the urgent need to push back against it.
And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener. How can we as individuals and as a society navigate these increasingly divisive times and promote civil discourse, even in the midst of heated political debates.
It's a question that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our willingness to engage in difficult conversations. We need to find ways to bridge the divides, to listen with empathy, and to seek common ground even when we disagree.
Well said. And that's a wrap on today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the most pressing issues of our time. And be sure to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on this complex topic. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving.